and you worked in consulting and public accounting before that as well. And so you had a pretty good run working primarily as an outside advisor, and then recently you have been, we've been talking about your role kind of working very closely as the CFO for True Terpenes. And so, that must have been somewhat of a shift going from being the outside advisor to really working inside the company. Tell us about that. Tell us about that shift, that change, what you find is different.
Well, I think one of the big things about working as an advisor that's outside versus inside the company is outside the company, they both have pros and cons. Outside the company, what ends up happening is that you typically have more than one client, right? You have a portfolio of clients. Well, one of them is that you get to see a lot of different interesting things through different companies. But once you're actually within a company, what you see is a singular pathway for the company itself. I would say that the main difference that you have is that in a firm, unless you own the firm yourself, the person that you're answering to is the leader of the firm. So, that's who we'd be talking to. You would be who I was talking to if I was part of, if working on clients through TCA. But when it comes down to working with industry and internally in private industry, is that you as the CFO really are responsible for that company itself. You feel actually a pretty single burden for the company itself. The burden feels different. It's hard to explain though. And the burden feels different because you can see the internal workings of everything at the company. So when you work with a lot of private industry, like for example, True Terpenes, is that you start seeing a lot of the more human aspects of the business versus, I would say, the technical aspects. So you'll see people when they're having a bad day, or you'll realize a lot more of, like learn more about the marketing side of things and why they do certain things a certain way, because that technically is not a core competency we have. So we don't usually see those things, but you get pulled into those items. So internally, you see just a lot more of the business in general. And you might not have the expertise for it, but it's one where you learn to handle different situations in there. And that's the part where you don't typically handle those items in a firm.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's generally what it is, but it's kind of hard to explain because typically, the honest truth is that if you are working close enough with a company at a firm as well, you will experience the exact same things. Like there's almost no difference when you work close enough with specific companies. You will feel the same ups and downs. So I think depending on the companies, you can actually get more stressed out working from an outside firm, because if you have enough of your, soul put into any of the companies you're working with, you're spread a lot thinner, and now you have every company makes you feel a certain way.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I think that the work that we do at TCA now is a lot different than what I used to do in traditional public accounting in that regard, because we do engage and integrate so deeply and intimately with our clients that, I definitely feel some of those ups and downs. But I would say, having I've had contracts where I literally kind of sat in the client's office and served like a member of their team for periods of time, anywhere from 6 months to a year at a time in my prior experience through public accounting firms, and then also kind of through some of the work with TCA. And I do too see the difference there between that and what I routinely do as a consultant on the outside. And I think there's ups and downs to both. And I think that there's value from the client's perspective. There's different kinds of value you get from both too, because I think that the objectivity that I can bring to the table as more of an outsider sometimes is super helpful. Whereas when you're too emotionally invested in everything that's going on and in the personalities of all of the people in the company, that may kind of skew the way a lot of us would advise our fellow leaders in that company, just because of that emotional investment in the narrative and the story of what's going on.
For sure.
Yeah. So the cannabis industry, I was trying to remember when you and I kind of got rolling in the cannabis industry. You reminded me before we started the podcast today that it was actually back in 2016. So
Yeah, we're old OGs in this now. Yeah.
for accountants anyway, right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's true because back in the day, CPAs just would not touch, would not touch that. So we were kind of one of the first. We were part of one of the first CPA firms that would actually get involved in the industry, and it was just as recreational was starting to come online. So having kind of worked with the industry for several years, what kinds of changes have you seen it go through in just this short period of time?
Well, it's this view is more, and I've said this before about the cannabis industry, is that people who aren't in it have to understand that there's microeconomies, and it's based off of every state and local legislation, right? The laws, because it changes the way the economics of cannabis works. When it comes down to Oregon, it's much more of a free market. Pretty much anyone could, and right now it's not this way, but before anyone could apply for a license and get it as long as they did everything correctly. And then other states, you have these lottery systems, which apparently now, if you look at the news, seem like they might be a little bit corrupt, but they had limited licenses. So the economics changed very quickly. In Oregon, there was a mad, they call it the green rush to cannabis because it was easy to do, and the easiest, lowest barrier to entry business was dispensaries. So we saw this, and very quickly you could see that dispensaries were one of the companies that had a lot of tax issues because of 280E. They weren't able to deduct a lot of their operating expenses, and it made it so that it's very hard to be profitable. But the truth is, if you opened up a dispensary in one of the limited licensed states, you're printing money. You'll make money regardless, and it's very different. So different states. So, but in Oregon, the thing that we've seen that most people guessed was more consolidation. A lot of businesses went out of business, and what we started seeing also is Canadian companies coming in and eating up companies, and that was just another consequence of the fact that the laws allowed in Oregon for you to be a foreign investor and be on a license. So in Oregon, the direction I see it moving is more consolidation. More companies technically going out of business just because the economics don't make sense, and that's true of any business. Most businesses go. What people forget is, I think it's just generally 9 out of 10 businesses will go out of business within their first year. That might be just restaurants. I'm not exactly sure what that number is, but I think what we're going to see is a lot more companies. People will move out of it, and the people who are still in it it's kind of survival of the strongest. It's kind of just capitalism at work. We'll see a lot of those companies combine together. We might see certain companies also just band together. There might be more. Oregon has more of a farmers market mentality for a lot of stuff, so we might see some more co-ops and some other stuff. But right now, there's also issues in the vape industry as well. I think we're going to see a pendulum swing of regulations that go one direction where they're kind of trying to do blanket bans over things, and it's going to swing the other direction, but in a closer to the middle where they're probably going to have regulations change for stricter rules around what you can put in your body, which I have my disagreements with, but that's what probably will happen, I think. What's good is that the companies I'm working with are very strong positioned to basically part of that new age of cannabis and the industry in general. So I have really good feelings for the future. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah. What kinds of other businesses or investments do you see yourself wanting to get into or participate in the future?
Well, what's kind of funny is that I might have talked to you with you about this before, is that I'm starting to see that in the future, and it's not now, but in the future, I would like to be able to make more decisions. And the truth is, a lot of the times when it comes down to the CFO role, I always say that we're like the Q to the James Bond. So what we do is we give the tools necessary for James Bond to complete his mission.
Right.
But I might want to be James Bond next.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying. So I mean, in my next company's whatever iteration that looks like, and it could be a long time from now, it could be 3, 5, 10 years from now, is that I would like to create more. I do find myself to be a little bit more creative. When it comes down to investments, it's an interesting place because there's an interesting thing that happens with investments is that whenever people are uncertain, they tend to diversify. So they'll put less bets on a lot of things because they're not certain what's going to actually work. When it comes down to cannabis, is you and I ourselves have a little bit more insight than other people. We've seen what works and what doesn't work. In the cannabis space with investing, I feel if I see something that in my gut, and my gut is just basically experience that I've had in the cannabis industry that seems like a good bet, that's when I'll place my bets. So, I mean, technically you could say that I've placed my bets on True Terpenes and VapeJet because I think those are going to be successful companies. When it comes down to the rest of the industry, I see a lot of companies that are being misled because when it comes down to it's interesting, but it's almost, this is a philosophical thing, which is everything in your life is a bet. When you get out of bed in the morning, it's a bet that it's going to be greater if you get out of bed versus if you just stay in bed, which usually is the case. Once in a while, it's not, and you just stay in bed, you know? And so I actually look at investments as a pit of snakes almost. It's a pit of snakes, and there's gold in the middle, and there's different sizes of gold. And usually what happens is that really large piece of gold in this middle of in a pit of snakes, there's a lot more snakes around, so it's really easy for you to get attacked by them, right? And when it comes down to people making investments, is that a lot of people seem to jump in the same pits. You know, they all make like a mad rush for the same pits.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous actually, because
if it's not cannabis right now, it's Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's Bitcoin,
right.
It's something else. They all were, you know, tulips back in like, what was it, the 20s
Yeah,
or 40s,
yeah.
right? That's what they was talking about, the tulip bubble. And the thing about it is that you might actually have a pit where there's not that much risk. I mean, not that many snakes, and the gold is decent. You know, like there's a decent amount of return. But if you get enough people in there, there's a very likely chance that some idiot's going to kick the snake over to you, and you're going to get bitten anyway. So that's what's really tough about investing, is that typically you're looking for something that other people aren't noticing, that doesn't have that many snakes, that has a good piece of gold in the middle.
That's an interesting way of thinking about So when you think about kind of being in the crowd, you're worried that somebody in the crowd is going to do something dumb, like kick the snake over your way.
Exactly.
That causes you harm. It's funny because I was listening to one of my friends was talking the other day about being, he had just taken a vacation to Hawaii, and he was swimming. He was off the Big Island, and he was swimming in shallow water. And before he knew it, he felt like he was maybe a quarter a mile, half a mile away from shore. I mean, it looked like a long way to him.
Yeah.
And that freaked him out because he was all by himself. And the thought that went through his head is, if there's a shark out here, I wish I was with a crowd, because then I would have a lower chance of being the one.
It's true. It's logical. It's really logical. Yeah.
So it's like the glass half empty, glass half full, right? You look at the crowd as a potential danger. He looks at the crowd as potential protection.
No, it's actually that's very accurate. That's a different way to look at it too. But I mean, that's when it comes down to a lot of investing. Is I kind of look at the trends and see where people are going. But cannabis is one where we've been lucky. We've been able to see the inside of a lot of different organizations, and I would say some we've seen are best in class. So we've seen the things they've done to succeed. And of course, in everything, there's an element of luck. That's just the way it is. Probability is key. It's that 1 in 400 trillion they always talk about being a human. That's a Gary Vee thing again. But
right.
Just overall in cannabis and in ancillary cannabis, I'm looking for the things that other people might not notice, but realize that there's a good return in it. And also if it's just interesting. The truth is, I've also learned that if something interests me enough, the return is that I get to look at it more. And if that's the case, I might invest in it just because it's interesting to me. Just like people too, right? Like if someone's interesting enough, you might just want to spend more time with them. So
yeah, I think that's so true. I think that, and I find myself, I'm always wanting to justify why I do things from a utility perspective. And so I think I make up reasons to spend time with people that are like other reasons besides that's just a cool person that maybe I want to spend some time with. Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the most important questions of our session here, what's the deal with the cats? So you're probably well known for sending out cat memes to clients, co-executives, leaders, customers, vendors, family members, friends, everybody, right?
Yeah.
How did that start? Where did this come from?
The truth is, I think if you talk to anybody, they would say that I'm really extroverted and humorous. But the truth is, I'm actually incredibly introverted. And if you gave me the option, I would just hang out with my cat at home alone. That's basically what I would do all day long, and just research and have a good time by myself. What I learned is that that's not a good way to get through life. Is that you gotta work with a lot of people, understand a lot of people, help a lot of people too. And what happened was I did a lot of experiments when I was younger, especially in the business context, where I would just try different things and see what the reaction was. And it's almost like Pavlov's dog. So like what happened is that if I would do a certain thing and it elicited a strong, good reaction, I would do it again. If it elicited bad reactions, I'd stop doing it. And so what happened was I just tried one day just like emailing a cat picture and just seeing what happens. And people laughed. They would write back like, that was hilarious. Like, can't believe you still sent me a cat picture. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. So I started talking about cats. And what I realized is that a lot of the times the quickest way to take down a barrier is self-deprecation, like humor. And it's really hard to take a guy seriously who talks about cats all the time. So now, you brought down this barrier and they're more open to talk to you. And you'd be surprised how many people like cats too. But it's done a lot for me. I had an instance where, this is something that happened at McDonald Jacobs, and I told Sang about it afterwards. He's the managing shareholder
Right.
there,
Yeah.
which was I got this new client, and the moment I took over this new client, she ended up emailing me, and it wasn't a very happy email. Like, she wasn't very happy with our services, like was kind of just upset about stuff. And it was kind of rambling and long, but I have never talked to this person before, and I didn't know who they were. So I said, okay, I'm just going to take a chance. And instead of sending her back a serious message, I sent her a bunch of cat pictures, just cats everywhere. And then she just wrote back like, ha ha ha, like, who would send all this? Who is this? And then I said, I'm sorry, like, my name's Brian. I'll be taking over your account. I'm really sorry that all those things happened, but now they got me. Like, I'll make sure to like follow up and do everything necessary to make, to get the job done and do a good job and make you happy. But then from there on out, she expected cat pictures in every single email. And then the first time she showed up at the office, she immediately yelled out, "Where's Brian? Like, I need to meet this Brian guy." He kept sending me cat pictures, and we ended up becoming friends. So it's one where that's mainly the reason, is I keep getting rewarded for it. Someone needs to punish me for it. If I get punished for it, then I might start second guessing myself. But it seems to work.
Yeah. No, it helps create that personal brand, right? It's a memorable thing. It kind of stands out. It's not, like you said, it's not a usual thing to do in the context of a public accounting firm serving their clients. So yeah, that's
well, it's gotten to the point where I've done it for so long that I have a mental file of like every cat picture I know. And sometimes someone will say something to me and I already know before they finish what cat picture I'm going to send them.
Oh yeah, you know what you're going to drop
I know,
on
yeah,
them.
exactly, yeah. And there's like a typical one where there's a cat that's shaking. It has its paw. It looks like it's shaking hands with a crawdad, and that's the one that says like "Nice to meet you." I send that one to almost everybody I just meet.
So content. I think a lot of times people will kind of finish off these kinds of interviews and sessions asking what your favorite book is. But I think, in today's day and age, the reality is we don't all just read books, right? Mm-hmm. We listen to podcasts, we watch YouTube videos, we may read books, we read articles. So I would expand this question, this classic question, to any of those things. What is your latest and greatest favorite content?
I have a few different things. I'm one of the people who still traditionally reads books. Like, not many people do that I know anymore, to be honest, but I'm still one of the people who do. But I mean, you've heard, I think it's been said multiple times throughout this podcast, which is I do listen to Gary Vee. He was the first person where you had mentioned him to me, and I actually did. I've seen him before, like just randomly pop up in my feed, but I just never watched his video. But once you mentioned him enough times, I said, okay, at least need to watch something.
Yeah, he's my virtual mentor. Never met him, never talked to him or tried to reach out or anything. But yeah, I listen to him all the time and try to kind of follow his ideas.
Yeah, and so what happened is I finally listened to one of his videos online. It was Daily V, and when I watched his hustle, I didn't realize I'm not to his scale of what he's done, but I didn't realize there's someone like me out there. I said, oh, there's someone like me, because I usually get, people will make, like, they basically like ask me why I do the things I do, because I'm obsessed with building and creating and building empires and, hustling. And I was always just hustling. So, I mean, I'm one of those people who will easily work 12 to 14 hours, but I just do it because I like it. And I watched Gary Vee, and it almost was like, validation or a hug, like, you know, someone who's saying, no, I'm like you too, I do that same thing, because I was always pointing around to like, no one else is doing this, why is it just me? Like, what's happening right now? And it was just very freeing, almost anything. It was like, you know, what you were saying, it was kind of like a virtual mentor. It was almost like a virtual dad, like giving you a hug or something. I thought it was very cool. So I do listen to Gary Vee. I've read the majority of his books, not all of them yet. I also think that when it comes down to key pieces of books or key piece of literature, I would say that Ray Dalio, his Principles book, is very good to.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a good one. There's Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way. I think that's a really good one when you're facing hard times, and then realizing that there's really no bad or good, it's how you interpret it. And all the instances where I had a lot of rough patches in my life led to very good things, especially when I worked through them objectively and saw them as what they were, which is just a thing in life. And then I think there's one more book that's on my mind because I was just reading it, but I can't think. If you want to start looking at high growth companies, like the highest growth companies, Peter Thiel, 0 to 1 is really good too.
Okay,
so that's one I absolutely recommend. And yeah, and then if there's an old one, is it Dave Meister? Like, what was it? Like,
David Meister.
Yeah, David Meister. His Trusted Advisor is really good. I think of anyone who's doing any type of service industry and doing any services, I think the Trusted Advisor is a key read, just to understand, because a lot of times they'll validate what you're doing. If you wonder why clients like you so much, the Trusted Advisor is a really good book, because it'll let you, you're like, oh yeah, I do all these things. This makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I know there's a lot of professional service firms have looked at that book, passed it around their teams, and tried to kind of live up to some of what's in there.
Yeah. And I think and then my last two would be South Park, and if you watch Rick and Morty, those are beautiful shows to, like, you need levity in life. You can't take everything too seriously, and those two shows are excellent if you just want to, like, sit back and think how crazy everything is. Because really, when you think about it, everything we do is not necessary. It's not actually necessary to work. We created this, and it's all one interesting game that we get to play. And so the whole, it's a little bit off topic, but the whole thing is, what game do you want to play? You get to play whatever game you want in this world. Like, how are you going to play that game? Obviously, a big factor is luck, where you're born, who you are. But we've created this playground almost. Like, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah. No, I think that's where you and I have always kind of seen things in a very similar way. That, and I would make the statement is, probably the key to not getting stressed out in the working environment is to not confuse your game with your real life, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, there's a difference between the game you play and the real life you live. And I think a lot of us, particularly in the professional world, we conflate those things, and we do get confused on that point. And I have to remind myself sometimes of, hey, wait a minute. I'm not gonna die tomorrow if I don't win on the game tonight, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is a game I'm playing, and sometimes I'm going to do better, and sometimes I'm going to do worse. But it's not my real life. I'll still wake up tomorrow. I'll be alive. I'll still have people that I love and care about in my life, and so on. So yeah, I think that's a
And I think just overall that I do try to put out to the world like a just positive energy. And the one thing I would say, especially in my life, is that I'm super lucky. I'm lucky beyond belief, and it's hard to explain. Everything seems to fall in my right direction. So all I do is just try to pay it forward. And someone asked me before, because they wanted to win at life, quote unquote win, but what is that definition? What is quote unquote winning? And they asked me, like, what would be winning for you? And I said, oh, I've already won. Everything's just upside for me now. So everything is just upside. So I'm usually just having a good time, even when I'm having a bad time.
So tell me about the late night exercise sessions, because I think I've seen on LinkedIn pictures of you in the gym with a timestamp of like 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning or something.
Yeah,
like that?
That's correct. Yeah, it's actually because I had a lot of people asking me how they could become more like me, both in work and just in life, and especially because one of the things is I used to do fitness consulting.
And hold on one second.
Yeah.
We're not talking 2 or 3 a.m. on a Friday or Saturday night. We're talking like in the middle of the week, 2 or 3 a.m. on like when you've got meetings and stuff going on the next day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's just the fact that a lot of people, like, the reason I was putting, like, first and foremost, the reason I was actually posting those was because people were asking me how to become more like me. I said, do you really want to? Because my whole thing is, number one, your physique is it's a lot of society telling you how you should look. I don't think everyone's people might not know this, but I technically was a Bowflex model back in the day. So I'm quite fit. But the truth to me is that I think you should look how you want, number one. So do you really want to look like me, or is it society telling you that you should look like me and therefore you want to do it? Because it's a lot of work. That's what I was trying to show people when I was posting this, is that even I make no excuses. Literally, to get very fit, I put it in no matter what. And that was what I was showing, is that even at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, or I guess that's Wednesday morning, I'd still go to the gym, and that's what it takes to actually look this way while also hustling in business to try to build these different businesses. And so for me, my whole thing was like, if you really want this, this is the work that has to be put in. And so I was just showing people the hustle that needed to be put in to be able to get what they were looking for. So a lot of the times what I look for when I'm talking to people is I'm looking for what is your actual goal and what is the strategy that gets you there. And again, to get fit, it's pretty simple answer. It's work out and eat right. It just, most people don't want to do that. So I showed people this is what it looks like. And a lot of times when someone says to ask me a question of, like, how to get more fit, and they said, how long have you worked out? I'll say, 21 years. And they said, I don't want to do that. That's too long. And it's like, well, then you're not going to get what I have technically, because I've put in 21 years of consistent working out. And it's the same with a lot of things when it comes down to people who, they might see your life or my life and they want to better it in terms of career. Well, there's a lot of groundwork that has to go into place. And I think that's where Gary Vee was very freeing, is that he showed how much groundwork he had to put in to be able to get where he was. And it's the same for myself in my life, is the same with you. Don't get me wrong, there's some people who get really lucky and just everything's handed to them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and that hard work is not something that's shown a lot in media. So what I did is I showed that work.
Well, that's very cool. And yeah, that is kind of the same thing that you see with Gary Vee, like you said. He's showing people what it actually takes to achieve some of the things, if you have to work for it. Like you said, there is such thing as winning the lottery. Some people in life didn't have to work for it, but for the most of us, that's how we're going to get anything, is by working for it. And I think it's great to have people like you or others that put out examples that show everyone, this is what it looks like to work towards what you want. And it's a very positive example.
Yeah, it's also good to know why you want something, right? Because I think it's one of the things that when it comes down to, like, the workout and fitness side, is that there was a time in my life where I was worried that maybe that I'd put too much weight into my own opinion of how I looked. So, like, maybe I'm just working out because I have some sort of insecurity and this is something I need to cover. So I just decided to get as overweight as I possibly could. And I gained 60 pounds or so. It was like around 57 pounds, just to see what it would be like. And I can tell you that afterwards, I was just as happy. I loved myself just as much when I was, I call him Fat Brian versus Thin Brian. And I mean, like, that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people should ask themselves the question of everything they're doing, even when they're going into, like, accounting, for example, right? Why are you getting into it? Like, ask yourself those questions, and also ask what you want in the future, because that can help you create a roadmap of where do you want to go. Like, if you know that I want to be the leader of a firm because I love firm work, I love working with clients, all these other things, because you've tasted it now and you like it, then what are the things you need to do to get there? Well, you should probably work at a firm to get the experience, right? That's the type of thing where, and when it comes down to, I want to be fit just because I want to feel better, well, that's good. Now, what do we need to do to get there? Map that out. So.
Yeah, I think that's, that really struck a chord with my own experience, having been on the faculty at Portland State and teaching accounting students for many, many years. Accounting in most business schools, the undergraduate accounting degree is one of the harder degrees in the business school that students might get. And so, everything's relative, right? I think from my experience or whatever, the accounting degree is not necessarily as quantitatively difficult as a hard science degree or a mathematics degree or something of that nature. But in comparison to kind of the peer group in an undergraduate business school, it seems like very hard and a lot of work, right? And so, I would always, every term that I taught, I would always have a pretty good percentage of students that were not doing well or maybe kind of failing out of the program, and a lot of times I'd ask the exact question that you asked. I mean, I'd be sitting with them in office hours or grabbing coffee with them or whatever to kind of just talk about their careers. And the first question, or one of the things that I always ask them is, well, why are you even doing this? Have you reverse engineered your life? Have you kind of projected out who you want to be and how this degree and this program and this class even is going to help you get there? And because my opinion is that if people didn't know that, it was just too much work without having that kind of inherent motivation of why they wanted to do this. The work wasn't worth it, which is exactly what many of them complained about, is this class is way too much work. It's not worth it. Why are we having to do all this? And my answer was, well, you tell me, why are you having to do all this, right? Have you even sat down and thought about that for yourself? Because for the ones who do know why they're doing it, they don't think it's too much work because they're learning something that is going to be super important for the rest of their lives and their careers.
I have a similar story to that because also this wasn't discussed in this podcast, but back in the day I was also an instructor. I was at Oregon State and I was instructing for the health and human science. I have a very strange background, by the way. So I've dual masters in accounting and also physiology, so biochemistry of exercise. So I did one of the more hard sciences back in the day when I was around 30 or so. But one student came up to me afterwards to talk to me about like her future because she was just wanted to chat, and I started talking to her and I had the exact same questions like what do you want to do in the future? And she said, I want to sell cars. So why are you studying physiology? Like, if you want to sell cars, why are you studying physiology? She goes, well, I'm not sure actually now they asked this question. I was like, do you like exercise? And she's like, well, no. I said, then what are you doing here? It's like, well, it's kind of seems cool. I said, honestly, I think you need to like go back and think about what you want in life, because the truth is, if you really want to sell cars, you can do that right now. You don't even have to go to college, honestly. Like college is going to be a very expensive pathway for you to sell a car. The interesting thing is that 2 weeks later, she quit the university and ended up going to sell cars, but that was not something the university wanted to be. They were not happy about that. But it's the truth. I say, first thing, don't let anyone else tell you how you should live your life. You should look at the things you want to do, and obviously don't hurt people, but look for the things that you want to do and see the types of steps and things necessary, and if you're willing to make that sacrifice to get there. It was something I talked a lot about when it came down to my consulting, when it came down to fitness. What are you willing to give up? Where do you want to go? And how long is it going to take you, and will you actually do it? Because if you don't want to do it, don't do it. And being real with yourself really helps, because the truth is, if I was working with people in the past and they said they wanted to eat like McDonald's still, I'm not going to stop them from eating it. You should eat what you want. Eat good food, be happy. And it's the same when it comes down to accounting too, because just as you say, I can resonate that is purportedly accounting is the hardest topic in business if you're going to get a degree. That's what most people will say, because it's much more technical. It's a lot more memorization that needs to happen, unlike a lot of the other degrees. So a lot of people would argue that's probably the most difficult when it comes down to the pure business side of things. But I did remember meeting people who, I don't know what happened. It might have been parents, it might have been something else, but someone imposed to them that they had to get an accounting degree. And I always found that very strange. It happened with a lot of my friends, actually.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Yeah.
So strange to me. And I thought it was so bizarre that they were putting themselves through this punishment when they didn't even want what they were doing. And it was interesting to see, because I even have colleagues now where I won't name them, but I see them and I remember the fact that they weren't, they didn't really like accounting. They did it just because someone told them to, and it was a good degree. And that always makes me a little bit worried. I don't want other people to be like that. So I try to save them from themselves almost.
Yeah, I think that's very prevalent in our industry. And I think a lot of people just assume, well, no one could really like accounting. No one could really enjoy it. So that's just the profession. It's all a bunch of people who are just doing it because it's a good gig to make money. And I think it's like, well, actually, I do like it. I was very passionate about learning it and the rules, and did find it very very interesting academically in school and have continued to find it interesting in the aspects that I could exercise in consulting with clients as well. So I think that, yeah, there actually are those of us who at some level maybe don't enjoy all of it, but did enjoy and do enjoy accounting as a topic, as a profession, as a discipline. And so, yeah, go for what you want to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is interesting to see those when people. I think one of the difficulties too, just in general, is that you as an educator before, and myself as well, is that I think a lot of times people just don't know what they want either. It makes it a little bit difficult. It's hard. It's a hard question. What do you want in life? It's one of those you're like, I don't know. I'm a kid. You know?
Yeah.
And even when you're an adult, you still think you're a kid, right?
Referencing Gary Vee again. It's all about self-awareness.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Brian's going to be back. He's committed. So stay tuned for him in future episodes. Well, hey guys, we're here again for another podcast episode. I'm here with AJ and Charlie, and it's been cold here in Portland. For this time of year, I feel like it's too cold.
I got my beanie on, so I'm all right.
I got my sleeves up, so I don't know what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Mind if I move on to the next article?
Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
So the next article that I looked at was an article about getting your company's finances under control in 6 steps, which is kind of fun to even presume that there are 6 steps to go ahead and just get your entire business's finances under control. This is in Business Insider, and I think there's a lot of really good information in here, and their overall layout is good, but I think there's a couple of alterations I would make. To them, their steps of how to manage your company's finances would be that they say you should understand your financial statement, which I think is very true. You should develop a growth plan, automate wherever you can, kind of like we've been talking about, price more accurately, invest in your customers, and then get the support you need. So these are all just sort of general good things that I think are good to do. But I think one of the things that it kind of breezes over is basically a more general stakeholder analysis approach, where you're just taking a look at who are all the different bodies that are somehow involved in what we're doing, who are my regulatory agencies, who are my vendors, who are my customers. And I just think that looking at all those pieces causes you to think about a lot of different aspects. It causes you to look at it in a way that your regulators would, for example. And I think that's crucial in getting I think almost all the problems I've ran into in business have in some way or another come back to a stakeholder analysis of just properly considering who's involved, what do they want to see, what do they care about, and how can we make that happen. And so, I was just wondering what you guys think is a couple things that are important for companies to do in managing their finances.
Well, I've always thought that businesses often place like accounting, HR, legal, management kind of in these silos, and there's not this interdisciplinary approach or like a holistic approach, like accounting is to deal with just the financial portion of the business, and HR is to deal with just the HR portion of the business, and management and legal do their thing. When I find a successful business, or one that kind of bucks the trend where there is communication between those silos, it makes it a much more efficient and like profitable business, I think, because everybody is talking to each other. And I think the silos that I mentioned are probably like the legs on which the business stands and the customers. So, I think from a financial standpoint, yes, I think those are great suggestions. But I think if there's one thing I'd like to see businesses do more of is leverage all those legs combined to help solve problems. And not get bogged down, of course, in, like cross communication, but to be able to, you should have a relationship with your accounting department, be able to go and ask them questions. Or if you don't have an accounting department, find somebody that does your accounting that you can trust and go with to questions. Same thing with legal. You should be consulting, your financial and legal team before you enter into different arrangements and whatnot. And having trusted team members in that area, it makes a big difference, I think, for you not to make costly mistakes, because you only know what you know.
Yeah.
And most business owners are not lawyers and accountants and HR professionals.
Even when they think they are.
Right.
Yeah.
So being able to know your own limit, for as a business owner, especially if we're talking about small businesses here, to know your strengths and weaknesses, and then to hire people around your weaknesses to be able to give you a complete picture of what's going on.
Yeah, this reminds me when you ask that question, what do I see as important for managing a company's finances? I think about it as a progression. I think about the progression of entrepreneurs' accounting needs, what it actually is in most cases versus the way we would like it to be as financial advisors for companies, right? Because as financial advisors for companies, and for like the authors of the article that you were referencing, there's this underpinning kind of belief system that companies should be using their accounting to manage their businesses, to improve profitability, to build dashboards that help them stay on top of what's going on, and be able to build and better manage cash flow. And that's certainly what we preach to our clients and prospects at TCA, and what we want businesses to do. But I also recognize that when the entrepreneur is going through their journey from just pure startup and building a company to kind of the growth stage of their business, it often doesn't start there. It's a rare entrepreneur. It's the more seasoned entrepreneur, maybe the serial entrepreneur who's had prior experience, who starts out of the gate and says, you know what, I need good financial information, and I need to know how to read financial statements, and in order to have the information that I'm going to need to manage this business. The more common practice is that entrepreneurs and operators, in my experience, start building their own set of heuristics and metrics and thought patterns kind of in their head and in their gut for how they know whether the business is doing well and how they're staying on top of cash that's in the bank, and they're not using any kind of traditional accounting, and they are not interested in using any kind of traditional accounting until they reach the point where they have to file a tax return. And that's usually like the first mechanism that slaps them in the face and says, hey, you're not living in a bubble here where you can just kind of think of this your own way. There is a conventional way to think of it, and you've got to communicate that way of thinking of it on a tax return to the government. And so, and so then what we see often are that businesses at that level, they will at that point bring in professional accountants. But unfortunately, again, what I often find is in the entrepreneur's mind or in the operator's mind, they're only doing that for tax purposes. Yes. And so, for me, and a great example of this point would be an industry that we've been working in. We've got a few clients in this industry, and we've been working in it since 2015, is in the cannabis industry. Because in the cannabis industry, there's a well-known tax rule that only allows you to deduct your inventoriable cost, your cost of goods, and it doesn't allow you to deduct your other OpEx. It's the Section 280E rule. And so a lot of times we're contacted by cannabis businesses and entrepreneurs who may want consulting or our help on getting that answer right, but solely for the tax return, right? Because they realize, well, we have to get this number correct in order to file the proper tax return, and we also want to make sure that we are including everything in our costs that we should include in our costs to file the proper tax return. But let's back that story up for a second, right? If you're telling me that you actually didn't account for all your costs in a unit of a product that you're selling until you had to file a tax return, then how did you know what your profit margin was on every unit of product you sold? The truth is, for most of these entrepreneurs, they don't. And that's what's kind of interesting about this point, is that they don't know their margins, and they're these kinds of things that I might think about as being very important to operate their business, they're missing out on. And with any business, if you're awash in cash, then that kind of hides the lack of optimization, right? So you get to a point sometimes with businesses where you've got good cash flow, things are going well, people are getting paid what they want to get paid, you're generating some value for shareholders. And so the proposition is, well, if you had better information and you managed the business better, you would optimize that. You'd have even more cash flow. You'd be generating more value for shareholders. You'd potentially have more money on the table to reward the talent on your team better. But that's optimizing with what is already kind of a good scenario, right? When there's good cash flow in the company. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they think from that perspective that cash kind of solves all ills, right? And so they really, they're not hungry to optimize, right? Which is unfortunate, because what they're missing is that optimizing that and optimizing their cash flow, even if it's already good, but optimizing their cash flow by, for example, knowing what your margins are and making good decisions about which products you sell or don't sell, or which products that you put more investment behind because there's some that are maybe more efficient or more profitable than others, and actually knowing that because you have the data to optimize your cash flow, that leaves more cash on the table. And if the proposition here is, well, we're not greedy, we don't personally need any more cash, well, you do want to grow the company, don't you? And so more cash on the table gives you that fuel to grow the company. And this, I love having the time here to kind of say all that and point that all out, because a lot of times I know in my gut that the work that a financial advisor or that accountants in general can do actually can help with the growth of a company in exactly the way that I just pointed out, that actually having the good information to make the right decisions that improves cash flow, puts more fuel on the fire to grow the company. So in that way, good accounting and finance can actually help grow the company. But that's it just took me at least 5 minutes to explain that story. I can't say in a 2-minute elevator pitch how doing accounting is going to help a company grow as easily, right? So I know it in my gut, but it's hard to express that. And I think that's one of those things that's hard for entrepreneurs to capture. So I go back to kind of that entrepreneur's hierarchy of where they start. They start with, oh, I need to file a tax return. And then, after that, it's often, oh, I need some more money to grow the business, and I know the bank might give me money if I provide them with a picture, and probably they don't even come to that conclusion until the banker meets with them and tells them, hey, where's your financials and your forecast? And then they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess, yeah.
Or the other sad thing is when they do start growing. I used to work with a lot of construction companies, and one of the things that would always happen with construction companies, because they're started by an owner operator, and the bookkeeping and the accounting portion of it is done kind of bootstrapped or in-house. They're not very actionable on most. I shouldn't say most are not very actionable if they're smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Larger, they're a little more sophisticated. But one of the things that would always make them, kind of like jump the fence on whether or not they needed planning was when they started to expand. And the reason being is because cash would just flow out the window. Because you got to buy inventory, you have to hire people. There's a lot of money associated with growing a business, and if you can't project that, it's a awful slap in the face when you find out that your reserves are gone now because you were expanding, and you're thinking you're going to get all this more money because you're doing more jobs, you're hiring more people, but to make money, you have to spend money, and in that growth phase, you're really going almost into debt to be able to get more sales.
Yeah. You have to make sure you're getting into the level of debt that your business can support in order to actually fund that growth you're trying to accomplish. Just getting people to understand that opportunity cost is a real cost, even though you can't see it in your financial statements, but it's hard to say what you're missing out on in your financial information if you don't have the right KPIs and you don't have the right targets in place to really understand what it's trying to tell you.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. I mean, I think that's a more succinct way to get at what I was getting at in terms of, are you optimizing? Cash flow seems good today, but are you actually optimizing or not? And that's exactly that point, that there's an opportunity cost there that you may not be seeing because it's buried in what you think is good cash flow right now.
Yeah.
Until things aren't going well and cash flow isn't as good, and then all of a sudden now you want to know in more detail, right? Yeah. But I think, AJ, like what you said in terms of growth and expansion, that is exactly what we see, is that often inspires people to realize, oh yeah, maybe I want to do more in terms of understanding my prior numbers from an accounting standpoint and projecting my future numbers in terms of a planning standpoint. I think that's exactly what we see happen. And so, I mean, I think that, that's kind of the divergence there, right? The entrepreneurs are kind of going through this journey where they start with taxes, they then need money or they want to grow, then they start getting financials. And it's a very mature entrepreneur usually who then kind of steps back and is like, yeah, actually having good financial information helps me make good operating decisions on the day-to-day basis, right? Which is exactly that's where most of us as financial advisors for companies, that's where we want to play, is we want to play in that role with those entrepreneurs. And so, yeah, we're constantly kind of waiting for a lot of folks to get to that point that they're ready for us.
Well, and I think that's a good point, and I think my 2 cents is if you're a startup business or you're like a sole proprietor or something like that, I do suggest that they try to kind of cobble together the accounting themselves, because it'll give them a better understanding later when a professional comes in there and is able to present them with statements that are correct or compiled by that accountant. They're going to understand what's going on there much easily than to have to try and explain it to them. So I think it's beneficial for somebody to try, especially in a small startup business where you are the sole proprietor. You can't really afford an accounting team or an accountant, outside accountant to come in. It behooves you. Then there's all kinds of information on the internet on how to do this. How to learn accounting. You don't need to go to a 4-year school to understand the basics of AR and AP and how a cash flow statement works.
Yeah, and just getting in there and doing it is going to lead you to, like you were saying, going to lead you to a lot of the challenges and just lead you to a better understanding of what you're really doing and why it matters.
Well, and I think you'll be able to evaluate a qualified professional when the time comes much better. Instead of just listening to the sales pitch from somebody, you'll be able to ask them poignant questions about what's going on in the business and the accounting and what more they can bring to the table than what you're already doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would say, not for nothing, but there are some businesses where there's not really a high requirement, or there's not much of a requirement or a need for a lot of collaboration or communication between various leaders in the company. Kind of small businesses, I'm thinking of small businesses that are mostly run by a single person,
right,
and that person has been successful for years. I wouldn't necessarily go to that person, and if they don't do their accounting in a conventional or what we might consider a professional way, I wouldn't necessarily go to them and say, "Oh, you need to do this," because they in fact may not. Because what I'm getting at is a reminder to everyone that essentially conventional accounting it's a communication tool. Mm-hmm. And so the prerequisite to actually needing conventional professional accounting is that there's actually people to communicate with about it, right? So I think one of the tipping points on this is this going to be a company run by one person?
Right.
Or is this going to be a company run by a team? And so when some entrepreneurs that I've worked with, and they kind of have their own way of looking at numbers, looking at the business, and they don't want to move off that's the way they want to look at it, and they are kind of developing their own accounting systems to some extent. And my answer to that is, well, that's cool if it's just you,
right?
But if you're going to be managing this company with a team, or coordinating with outside bankers, or coordinating with outside investors, or
any stakeholder,
any other stakeholders or whatever, then what are you going to do? Create your own education program for how you think about the numbers, as opposed to just relying on the conventional business education and knowledge that others have, right? And so I think from an efficiency it's an efficiency of communication that I kind of diverted into a different point, but I guess my point is that I think entrepreneurs and operators have to make a decision at some point whether it's makes sense for them to learn that common language of business in order to collaborate with others.
Right.
And if it doesn't make sense because they got it and they've had it for years and they've got it handled and it's only going to be them working on it, then God bless them, right? Go forth and do things without conventional accounting, and it's not going to be a problem.
But there's a reason they say accounting is the language of business. I mean, that's not just something that's real.
Well, we've had a good set of discussions here today, guys.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see everybody next week.
It's been fun. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Hey, and if this is helpful to you and you enjoy it, please subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and you'll get updates every time we produce. We're gonna keep this going for you as regularly as we can. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.